Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I've entitled this particular podcast, Reconnecting. So how do you reconnect after a time away? You know, one of the more vulnerable things to do is to reconnect after a time apart. So you're going to have to deal with why you want to, when to reconnect, how to reconnect, and sometimes the if. And if you do, things not to do when you try to reconnect with someone. So like I said, something to consider is why you want to. So are you longing for their companionship in particular? And, you know, are you simply lonely? Is this some sexual urge? And, you know, thinking about it, how would you respond to that question if you were asked by your person of desire? You know, the desire... the desire for companionship is in all of us. And we want that for protection. We want that for, you know, for love, for sex. And, you know, this often represents an extension of ourselves, and that we give love and express our love and emotions, you know, verbally, physically, visually, like through eye contact. And, you know, it's amazing how the eye contact satisfies a lot of the longing. So, as if to say, you know, what I desire is almost at my fingertips. And, you know, it can actually be inspiring to push harder to make the journey to be nearer to thee. So here's what. Now, imagine a scene. Let's say you're at an airport or a train station or something, and that person who you've been longing for, you know, you've sort of kind of created an opportunity that you're going to see them again. But let's say they're across the way. Now, all this has sort of been working in your head, and you're wondering about, okay, what's the future going to hold? And the minute you see that person, now they're too far away for you to actually call to them. So now you're going to have to make that jog. You're going to have to catch up to them and find them. You know, they're looking for you. But think about how at that moment you have just elevated all of your senses, your desire, your emotion, everything. It seems like, wow, this thing is finally going to happen. All this is buoyed by the fact that you saw them and you wanted them in your presence. Are all of those feelings worth the effort that you're about to put into getting there today? So I'm going to discuss that. Now, reconnecting is a very delicate balance, and of your perception, your emotional needs. And there's definitely a way to reestablish a connection to succeed. Now, one of the things is you have to know why you want this particular person. So you're going to have to sit down and really think about this. And this is something that you can write down so that you can keep track of all of this stuff. But why do you want this particular person? And if, you know, consider, you know, the reason that they were gone. If they were gone because of a breakup, then you're going to ultimately need to know what reconnection is going to mean to you. And it's going to get tested if just simply due to the misunderstandings that came about when you broke up in the first place. So you're probably going to have some unresolved issues that led to the breakup. And those kind of things are important to list because they're going to have to be addressed. And you're going to have a desire to deal with them. You can't sweep them under the rug. And I think the important thing is if you bring that up, it's going to show that there is some rationale for wanting to problem solve. Because one of the things that happens in reconnections is we get caught up in the honeymoon phase all over again. So we forget that there's problems and we just get caught up in love and wanting to be in love and making love and all those good things. But we forget to talk about why we split. And this is important. This is critical because sometimes we're afraid to deal with things. And where that leads us is to those valleys of darkness that we try to sweep under the rug that then becomes problems that we cannot seem to overcome. So it's going to require something of us in the way of learning. We're going to have to change. So we're going to have to do some growth. And that's an important component in this. I think when you can show that you have some growth, that gives you something to hang your hat on. You can say, wow, we have potential. People have disagreements all the time. But the individuals that are successful in relationships learn how to handle conflict and resolve it and move on to the next so that you can have the happy times, but not have the happy times, but. Happy times, but means, okay, we're having a good time, but the other shoe is going to drop. And you know that dangling thing in the back of your mind that, okay, I hope that this doesn't turn into like the other time. We were having a great time and then all of a sudden something happened. Somebody lost their cool and it just ruined the experience. So you want to be able to process through those kinds of things so that they don't end up ruining a good time. Because having new memories is very, very important. When you're reconnecting, you have to create new memories. There could have been a lot of reasons that stuff happened in the past, but you want to give confidence. You want to give time to the concept that we can create new memories and we can go on. We can grow. Now, getting back to the idea that when we was talking about why you split, when you come to that discussion, you're going to have to learn how to be able to discuss things without the criticism that undermines the conversation, that undermines the intimacy of the conversation, the vulnerability. Because quite often when we find people who are willing to be in a listening place, sometimes we take over advantage of those moments and go for the jugular. When I think it's an important time to learn how to use some restraint. I think we should be tactful in the conversation. That's really important because when you're being vulnerable, then there's the possibility that these things are just right on the surface. They can be very painful to recite, but you got to listen. You got to listen to these things. And if you're the person that's the listener, I think it's important to write down some of the details. And remember, we're writing down details because we want to be able to address them. We're not using the list as a way of picking apart or picking on someone's vulnerability, because I know that's a fear. I mean, can you imagine the person who's sitting down, writing things on a clipboard, very stone-faced, and it's like, okay, what is that person writing all of that down? It's like they're an authoritarian or something like that. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're writing things down because we want to be able to keep notes so that we can address the concerns and write down the good stuff too. This isn't always about writing down the problems, but we are problem solving. And I do want to remind people that this is about solving the problems so that we can have a good outcome. So this is not a bad thing. This is just part of the process. So after you've done this for a while, what I want you to remember to do is to take a break. Just take a smoothie break. Just ease up and think about what it was like. Remember that scene in the airport that I talked about where you see that person and you have that rush of love and you want to catch up to them. You want to grab them, hug them, hold them, remind them how much you love them, all of that. Reconnect with that moment and share what that feels like. Because this is what we're going to do to elevate the mood and to remind us and to remind our partner that we're doing this for all the right reasons. That there's a lot of love in the room. I'm going to take a break, and I'll be right back after this.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar. GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm John Johnson talking about reconnecting. Now, the why parts of this, there were a number of questions that I proposed in that first segment, and I'm going to get to the why part. The why is really important because this is going to be your motivation for wanting to stick it out. And you may have had an opportunity to, say, experience another relationship, and it gave you the time to do some contrast and comparison. And, you know, we do that all the time. The experience of that has helped a lot of people appreciate something that they may have had in the past. So if the opportunity comes about that you can revisit something that means a lot to you, then, and I'm talking about in this case, a relationship, maybe somebody that has been in your life and you went separate ways for a while and you want to revisit it, then you have the option to do that. You have to revisit a lot of decisions that you may have made in terms of the split. And it gives you the chance to say to yourself, hey, I made a good choice. I didn't make a good choice. I'm different. And I hope that you are. I hope that whatever happened in your experience helped you to grow, because this is going to help you answer the why. Because the why is going to have to carry you through a lot of self-examination when you are in this conversation with the person that you're reconnecting with. Because the questions that you are going to be asking of them and they of you should be better questions than you would have had before. Because if you don't, then it's of no purpose. It's of no point. Because remember, we're doing this because we feel like we're a better person. We have a better chance of having the outcome that we want. And just doing it for the exercise of being in somebody's life, well, you've got to have more reason than that. So think about the why. I think one of the things that I recall people talking about when I've discussed with groups, I'll have a group of people sit around, kind of have a circle and discuss why they are attracted to a particular individual. And this is something that invariably comes up. It is how that person makes them feel about themselves when they are in their presence. I know a lot of people who have been in college, and one of the things that they liked about a particular individual, they were a good study partner, they were encouraging, and you can probably all relate to the fact of when you had a difficult something in life, that somebody was a very good support person for you. They seem to understand the nuances of how you operate. That is always very attractive. We get into these places sometimes where being vulnerable is generally a very difficult thing to do. But yet, we become vulnerable. Somebody seems to get us. They seem to understand who we are. And that makes us feel very special. It makes us feel validated. And, there isn't too much else like that in life. Being accepted for who you are, for whatever the circumstances. But I picked that example because I think it's something that we can all closely relate to, that is feeling down, feeling vulnerable, feeling defeated, and for someone to give us that emotional hug. That physical hug sometimes is all that's needed. There's no words, but just feeling accepted, feeling understood, where you can just kind of let down your guard. And when you're in the presence of that person, that is the kind of feeling that you want to be able to sense is going to be okay, that you're not going to be taken advantage of, that you don't have to have your guard up. That's a very good why you would want to be with a person, because they give you that. You feel good when you are in their presence. And I think that's something you want to communicate. Write that down. Now, something I have not mentioned a lot about in this particular podcast is sex. I think that's an easy go-to. I think when we feel a really good, strong sexual chemistry with someone, we obviously want to hang on to that, because that can be very, very important for us to want to be able to connect to, not only being sexual with someone else, but connect our own feelings, our own sexuality, and being able to call all of that up with a particular individual. Because some people actually help us feel very free, very vulnerable, and experiencing that can be quite a rush. But as we've all kind of had the experience, it can be very intoxicating, and sometimes it becomes singly focused. And merely having a sexual relationship in and of itself may not be very sustaining, at least not for all eternity. It may be good in the moment, but you're going to have to build on some of the other things that I talked about. Now, the when can be a very tricky thing to deal with. So here's an example. When to reconnect. If you've just gotten out of a breakup with someone else, reconnecting with a new person oftentimes takes on the energy of a rebound. So you're going to have to do some self-examination as to what happens. And if you're transitioning in and out of relationships, like, you're opening and closing drawers in a cabinet, then you want to examine why you're doing that. What's happening for you? So the when is important. Like I said, when you come out of one relationship and bounce into the next one, it has the quality of being a rebound relationship. And I would say to anyone that if you're getting involved with someone, you're certainly going to want to ask questions about their history. And if they're telling you that they're just getting out of a relationship, then I'm not saying that that's a total no-no, but it may not be a red flag, but it's definitely a big caution one. Because I think people need time to do a self-examination so that if you become involved with them, they're not projecting some of their old stuff onto you, therefore making you the next person that they're going to cycle through. And you want to think about that for your own vulnerability. Yeah, another thing to think about is if a person has had, say, a traumatic event that has happened in their life, they are generally very vulnerable at a time like that. And you may be a person who is very comforting to them. And that might seem like a really good relationship to be involved in. Well, that might not be a very good time to do something like this in terms of to get really heavily emotionally attached, because we can easily get attached to someone who we commiserate with. Or if you're a person who tends to find yourself helping a lot of people because that gives you a lot of juice. This might be one of those situations where you feel like, wow, you want to reach out and help somebody, and they become very attached to you. That's not necessarily a good time to be getting involved with that person, because you are there as a support person, and it sort of crosses the line as to making them dependent upon you in a way that probably won't sustain itself after they've processed the trauma. I'm going to take a break, and I'll be right back, and I'll talk about these subjects some more.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm John Johnson, talking about reconnecting. So where I ended up in the last segment was talking about times when not to reconnect, when you've gone through something that is fairly heavy. That is, now it's okay to be a support person. So I'm not talking about not being supportive, but I'm talking about the part where we're reconnecting all the love and really getting involved in something that way. When a person has had a real traumatic event happen, being a support person, I think, is very important, very critical, and however that may come about. But building your love relationship on that sort of thing, it makes it a little shaky, because as people process through the circumstance, your need may not be what that other person needs in terms of as they grow to be more self-sufficient, more self-sustaining. You may have just been there for the time being. I mean, they say relationships are a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Oftentimes, you're not going to be the lifetime. You're going to be the transition to their strength. And depending upon how they see it, they may see you as the person. They may appreciate you for having been there at a time when they needed you. And that may be your strength. And so it may possibly work, but there's a caveat. There are a lot of times that it doesn't. And it really is incumbent upon you knowing the individual. But a good time to meet somebody, either yourself or if you're interested in someone who you may be trying to reconnect with, is when they've had time to evaluate their life. Think about the choices they've made. And when that has come about and you can have conversations about the growth and you feel that there is a lot of commonality. I mean, it's great when two people, their lives sort of take their own trajectory and then you cross paths and you find out there's a lot of things that you have in common for the very reason that you've had the opportunity to reconnect and say, wow, I've grown in this particular way. And the other person can say, wow, I grew in that way too. It probably makes the relationship much more interesting because you can talk about the things that you have in common. And that's always attractive. So that's a wonderful opportunity to reconnect after you've had a chance to evaluate your life, find out what your purpose is, And then to find that person always also has a very similar trajectory, very similar interests, and that they can support you in being who you are. Now, something to not do when we're doing the reconnecting thing is, this could be very tempting, and it can be very tempting to want to take the relationship stories that you had in the past and start assigning blame as if you've processed all of that and have made answers for both of you. I mean, that generally doesn't work when you're wanting to be in conversation with someone anyway. I mean, you could have your point of view, and as a topic of discussion, be sure that when this particular thing happens, that you're really discussing it from your point of view, but that you're also open to hearing what the other person has to say. Because I believe the truth is somewhere in the middle. I mean, we all have our perception, but I think what's dangerous about that is to think that your perception is the truth. See, your perception and the truth are like two totally separate thought balloons. And it's interesting how people just tend to merge those two together. And that can be very off-putting. That's one of those things that you don't want to do. Things like that tend to kill romance more than anything else. Because what you seem to convey in those kinds of moments is that you're the know-it-all. You may have had counseling to help deal with your, let's say, whatever came up because of the breakdown in the relationship. But remember, that's from your point of view. And your counselor is your advocate, and they may have helped you deal with a lot of problems because of it. But hopefully, the counselor also shared with you ways in which to reconnect or to talk to people about how you feel. And that sharing your feelings is definitely an important thing to do. But when there's another person involved, there's a way in which you go about communicating with each other that doesn't necessarily assign blame, but that you're open to hearing what each other has to say. Because that goes along the lines with the acceptance thing that I talked about before. It's great to be able to share your feelings, feel accepted, feel understood. Now, if you have issues that you need to resolve, sure, you can get a counselor who can be a referee who can help you resolve those things together. If you can't seem to come to a good understanding about them yourself. But hopefully you've learned something in working with a counselor that also has taught you how to be very loving and that you process this stuff, because that's important. You don't want to just sit on it and just let it stew, because that's the part that happens to a lot of people when they just can't get past something. And that's one of the things to think about when this person re-enters your life. Are there things that you were just stuck on that you can't get past? Because if you can't, then maybe this reconnecting thing maybe that ship has sailed for you and that person. So that's just a thought. But again, we're talking about some of the things to not do. And one of those is you don't want to bring up a bunch of stuff that you're not prepared to talk about and also be questioned about. Because think about this, when you start talking about some of these subjects, the emotions can really get to flowing and you can get confused, you can get overwhelmed. This can be something, it can be emotionally overwhelming, and you get tears flowing. I mean, there can be tears of joy. But I think one of the things to keep in mind here at this point is we're reconnecting because we want this person in our life. We feel a great deal for them because I want this to be a happy occasion. And to celebrate this coming together, or this opportunity to discuss that and to try to make the best of that situation. There's always help out there if you need it. I mention the word counselor a lot because there have been times in our experience where we would think of counselors as, well, there was a stigma attached to it as if it's not a good thing. Well, I think anybody who's willing to take on their life and the problems and doing it in a healthy way really deserves a lot of support to do so. And counseling is a way to do it, whether it's a spiritual counselor, someone at your church, a professional therapist who's licensed to give advice. And the whole purpose behind this is to make your life better. If you're able to do that by getting some helpful tips from something you read, then do that. Invest your time in that. But whatever you do it, put your heart and soul into it, and I think you'll have a good outcome. You'll at least learn a little bit more about yourself that you didn't already know, and that's a good thing. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.